Joining me now, we have Congressman Adam Smith, ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman, welcome. It's always good to see you. So when you compare Rubio's Munich remarks to last year's fiery speech from Vice President J.D. Vance, would you say he is taking a softer approach, or is that just the message on the surface?
Well, Rubio is taking a softer approach, and his speech was focused on shared responsibility. And if that speech genuinely reflected Trump policy, okay. But I think what you're hearing from our allies in Europe is, show, don't tell. Actions speak louder than words. Pick your cliche. But given what Trump has said about Greenland, what he said about Canada, what he said in general about how he, as president of the U.S., should have unchecked power to do what he wants in the world, the way he has failed to understand the threat that Putin poses not just to Ukraine and Europe. He has not yet dealt directly with Putin's sort of underlying causes and challenged Putin's worldview of Russia's claim to Ukraine. All of that makes people in Europe and elsewhere, and me for that matter, skeptical that Secretary Rubio's speech is a true reflection of where President Trump and his team are going to go with their policy going forward.
Yeah, sounds like you can say whatever you want, but we're watching to see what you actually do. Let's pivot to Tuesday, when the U.S. and Iran will hold another round of nuclear talks in Geneva. This comes after the U.S. sent that second aircraft carrier to the region. And President Trump said Friday a change in power in Iran would be, quote, the best thing that could happen. As the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, sir, what are your expectations for this meeting? And if it does not go well, are you concerned the White House could launch a strike?
Yes, on that last point, I think President Trump was very close to using military action a couple of weeks ago. One of the limiting factors that has not been as widely reported as it could be was we didn't have the assets in the region. There was concern that if we started a fight with Iran in that situation, we could not adequately defend, our troops that were in the region. We didn't have as many ships and missiles and defensive systems there that we have now positioned in the weeks that followed. Yeah, I think it is distinctly possible that Trump would take that action. And the tricky situation that President Trump is in is, okay, you're focused on nuclear. So we should block Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, which, of course, is what President Obama had accomplished in the JCPOA that Trump tore up, and then Iran went sprinting towards enriching fuel and moving back towards a nuclear weapon. So you've got that piece of it. But the broader concern is the role that Iran is playing in the region in their ballistic missiles program. Iran continues to export revolution and destabilize countries around them. In Yemen, in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon, as they build up their missiles, they do that as well. So is that on the table for this negotiation? And lastly, of course, is Iran's brutal repression of their population. We don't yet have a clear idea of what President Trump's goals are from this negotiation. Is it all four of those things, or is it just a piece?
Let's turn to Washington, sir, as Homeland Security Director Kristi Noem is facing backlash for this remark that she made. It was on Friday. Take a listen to it.
Although the Constitution gives states the primary responsibility for running their elections, Congress also gives authorities and duties to the federal government. Now, as the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, those authorities lie within my department, and the responsibility lies with me. We've been proactive to make sure that we have the right people voting, electing the right leaders to lead this country.
What does she mean by the right people voting, electing the right leaders? And is it, yes, sir?
I'm sorry, that's very interesting, because that ties back to a second point that I was going to make on your first question, but I didn't want to sound too long-winded. And that is, and this ties directly into Rubio's speech and some of the things that Vice President Vance and President Trump have said. So one complaint about Europe is they're not doing enough to defend themselves. Okay, fine. They should build up their defenses. Now, I will point out that them not having strong defenses was by design, by our design, post-World War II. It's the way we wanted it. But fine. But the second big critique is, this was Vance's speech last year. They don't have the right values in Europe. Well, what does he mean by that exactly? And now we circle back to what Kristi Noem said. Well, before Trump came along, when you had that question about values, you would have a discussion in the U.S. focused on representative democracy, sovereignty, the much maligned rules-based international order, the idea that it's not might makes right. Every person should have a say in how they are governed, and part of what the U.S. is trying to do is protect those values. Donald Trump and his administration and Kristi Noem have made it clear they don't care about those values. They care about power. They care about Trump having power, and Kristi Noem making sure the right people get elected. And we saw what Donald Trump did when he lost the 2020 election. He led an insurrection to try to overturn it in every way he could. They are trying to undermine the very values that Europe is standing up for. So if someone goes to Europe and says, we'll support you if you support the right values, okay, that's fine. But the values that Trump is promoting are not the right values. They're values of autocracy. They're undermining people's right to freedom and liberty. I mean, my gosh, look at the way ICE is, conducting itself, locking people up and detaining them without any due process. Are those the values that Vice President Vance wants Europe to follow? If so, I'm not with him, and I'm not with where he's taking the United States. So I think these things are very connected and very dangerous to the freedom and prosperity of this country and the world.
So glad you were able to share all that with us. A big thought, and we thank you so much. We'll look forward to seeing you again, Congressman. Thank you. He claims he's got more than $1 billion in political funds. How President Trump could spend the cash